G'day everyone. Welcome to another Toon Under podcast, the Southern Hemisphere's biggest and best podcast, all things Newcastle United. My name's Keegan. Tonight I'm joined by Jack for this special little, we'll call it a two-parter, Jack. Part one will be Jack coming off the long run about Eddie Howe. Good or bad, you'll have to wait and see. And then part two, we'll do a little bit of a deep dive into our transfer situation and what should we do in January. This sort of next month especially could go 1,000 different ways. So we're keen to pick it apart and find out what we think is going to be the best way forward for Newcastle United, not just for this month, but the next sort of 4 or 5 months towards the back end of the season as well. So without further ado, Jack, I'll give you the new ball, mate. You can come off the long run and the floor is yours.
Yeah, I've got a bit to get off my chest here. I've come off Twitter for one, right? I've just come off Twitter in the last couple of days, and I did this early in the season as well. Like, it's not that I can't accept, or that people have got different opinions, or it's just that Twitter experience is just pretty toxic and negative at the moment. Even not to do with football, but recent results, everything that's been going on with Newcastle and the stuff about Eddie Howe, which I know is probably a social media thing more than anything, but it's just got my back up quite a lot. So I'm just going to talk. I've got a kind of structure for what I want to say. And some of this is stuff that we have covered already previously. So if you don't like hearing my voice, tune out now. But if you're interested in what I've got to say, most people probably know my opinions anyway about this, but I just want to back up what I think a little bit. So first of all, I just want to make one thing completely crystal clear. Newcastle's form in the last 3 weeks, because it is only 3 weeks, but the form since the Everton game in December has been shit. It's been absolutely terrible. There's been 6 defeats from 7 games. Horrible defeats to Milan and Chelsea. Oh, gut-wrenching. Awful to witness. The Luton and Forest games have been terrible because of the standard of opposition, and it's just been a bad month. We don't know what the long-term impact is going to be of this, and it's not good enough. It's not good enough by Newcastle standards, and it's not been good enough by Eddie Howe either. So up until this point, he's been pretty much flawless for the last 2 years, but I'm sitting here saying that we need to learn lessons. He needs to learn lessons. We need to make improvements. This is something that gets thrown at fans who defend the recent run, or who defend Eddie Howe, that we're just happy clappers who just think everything's great all the time. Well, we don't. It's been shit. It's been really bad, and I want to get that out there first out the way. Eddie's future is now a hot topic, so I think it might be mainly a social media thing. It's hard to say sitting 10,000 miles away, and this is something that does get picked up as well. I do live 10,000 miles away. That some people think on social media that gives my opinion less weight. A couple of people I've had a few words with, but I don't feel that atmosphere at the ground. I'm a few steps removed from Newcastle itself in the northeast, so I don't know how loud this swell of opinion actually is, and what demographic is kind of driving it. Social media is never the best gauge of majority opinion. Never, ever is. So this could just be a response to a loud minority. I think it probably is. But social media is influential, and a couple of our executive decision makers use social media. They go on it. They listen to what people say, so they won't be sheltered from this. Maybe they shouldn't be, but there is people who think Eddie should be sacked, or who, it's more people than I think it probably should be. There's been a few polls going around on social media that have come up with this. I think this is fucking absurd in many different ways. So I'm going to explain a bit of why I think that as we get into it a bit. Some of this will make eyes roll. It'll make voices groan, because people are sick of hearing it. They don't want to hear about the injuries, the stuff like that I am going to talk a bit about. But whether you view the context and the circumstances as reasons or excuses, that depends on your viewpoint and how you want to view it. But you can't deny cold, hard facts, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take a leaf out of Rafa Benitez's book. I'm going to tell you some facts. So before we get to the mitigating circumstances, of which there are many, let's have a little consideration of some of the criticisms of Eddie recently. So one of them is that he's too loyal to players. And I do think this one might have something to it. I think it's fairly obvious why a football manager might want to use players he trusts and that have done well for him previously. But things like Dan Burn walking straight back into the team at left back does raise some eyebrows because of how Tino's done when he's played. Luton are physical, Forest have Chris Wood, so it makes a bit of sense to bring Burn back in that sense. But yeah, Tino's been so good and Burn's struggled since coming back in. So maybe Eddie is a bit loyal to Dan Burn, although he was part of the best defence in the league last season. So there's reasons for it. Miggy's another one who always gets grief. He's always first in the firing line when things don't go well. His form has definitely dropped off a cliff. But who's going to replace him? Matt Ritchie's 34 and he's just not good enough. There's nobody. If he was, he'd be playing more games. Trippier's had a terrible month, horrible, but he's the most senior player in the squad. So if anyone deserves loyalty and the opportunity to play himself back into form, it's definitely him. If anyone thinks playing Lewis Hall, 19-year-old Lewis Hall would have made a difference to the results, then I don't. I just think they're flailing about in desperation because nothing we've seen from him so far suggests that he would have. And it's quite amusing to see calls for Matt Ritchie and Emil Kraft and Paul Dummett from the same people who wanted them nowhere near the squad a few months ago. So Eddie might be loyal, and this might be something we do come to see and we question as time goes on. And I do know it was perceived as an issue for him when he was at Bournemouth. So there's one criticism of Eddie. He's too loyal to players. There might be something in that. Tactical inflexibility. So Newcastle have got a certain way of playing, intense, pressing, aggressive. It got us to the Champions League last season. When we're at our best, we're ruthless, we're clinical, but when it doesn't work, it does look disjointed and it's easy to counter. There's big gaps in the midfield. It doesn't look great when it's not working. So the system relies on players with certain attributes doing certain things at the right time. If those players are not available, not fit enough, low on form, low on confidence, then it kind of falls apart. But I do think he has tried to change things. Like there's been certain games where we have tried to sit deep and defend a bit more. It just hasn't worked. Like for whatever reason, it just hasn't worked. I don't think that's him not trying something new. I just think the execution hasn't been right. So I think maybe there's learnings around how to adapt in game or what kind of profile of player we might need to target in the future who's going to help us in this regard. And maybe we need more than one main system or main way of playing, but that's going to take time on the training ground. So we can just switch between them depending on what's happening, but this is kind of like high level elite stuff that Eddie has not really had to consider before now anyway. Forest was absolutely terrible. It was awful by Eddie Howe. It was awful by the players, awful by the coaching staff. And I don't know why he didn't change things when it was obvious what was going on. But Eddie, I can think of a lot of examples. Brentford away last season is the big one. He brought Gordon and Wilson on at halftime and he completely changed the game. So he's proven that he can do that. He did try that at Luton as well. He brought Isak on before halftime. And then if Isak's goal had stood, who knows, how the rest of the game would have panned out. So he's got a track record of skill, innovation, and tactical awareness, and that's not changed because of a 3-week spell of bad results. The away form's been terrible. This is a third criticism. The one victory was the freak 8-0 at Sheffield United. 2 draws and 6 defeats. Second worst away record in the league. It's just been awful, abysmal. But there is some mitigation in that the four of the away games have come immediately after hard Champions League games. Wolves and West Ham, we were actually all right, and we could have won both of those games. But we only lost 3 away games in the whole of last season. We had the third best away record, so it is alarming what's gone on this season so far. Eddie won 8 away games last season, so he's proven he can do it. People have got this idea that we're never going to win another away game ever. It's just complete nonsense. He's done it last season. He's won an away game this season. He's not forgotten how to win away games. It's just right now it's not working. I think if it continues in this form and if the home form drops as well, then we're going to have a serious problem. But I'd back him to improve it. So, as I said before, there's a growing groundswell that these deficits mean that his job should be at risk. And I think some of the criticisms are fair and valid. We should ask questions. But I'm going to outline why I think the idea that he should be sacked is just ridiculous beyond sensibility. And I think you spoke about this the other day, Keegan, and I've spoken about it in a previous pod. And I thought it was just worth coming on to put to bed. I think the current my current thoughts about it, and because I needed an outlet. I need an outlet for this. That's been going on, as you can probably tell. Mitigation, right? Injuries and fatigue, right? I'm not going to labor this point. I know people don't like listening about this, and it's not solely to blame, but the squad has been decimated, completely decimated by injury since late October. There's been points in the 2 months since then when we had an entire squad of 11 and goalkeeper unavailable through injury. And that team of injured players could probably beat the team of fit players that we've had playing, you know? We fielded the same outfield 11 for 6 games in a row, including 17-year-old Lewis Miley, who's been brilliant, but still he's 17. And there's barely been any suitable options on the bench. Maybe Eddie could have used the bench a bit more, but it would have been a significant drop off in quality of players. When players have come back, more have gone down. You know, there was a game a couple of weeks ago where Cher and Joe Linton got injured. The fatigue is cumulative, you know, and the fit players have been forced to run into the ground. Losing Nick Pope was an absolute hammer blow against Manchester United. Dubravka, I had hopes for him. We'll talk about the goalkeeper situation in a bit, but he's completely failed to be adequate backup. And this might be an excuse. It's an excuse. It's a reason. But a squad fighting on 4 fronts cannot sustain this level of fitness and injury without being seriously adversely affected. And especially a team that depends on the intense running and fitness that we do. So you can't ignore this as a huge mitigating factor in this bad run. Or if you are, you're just being blind, willfully blind in the extreme to claim that it's somehow not relevant or not as relevant as it was. It gets more relevant the more games we have and the more fatigue sets in, you know. Injuries have derailed this season, as it looked like they might around the time of the Bournemouth game. So that's the story, I think. That's the big mitigating factor, the big story. You cannot look at this without saying that injuries have completely screwed us. I want to talk about Sandro Tonali. When your marquee summer signing gets banned for almost a full season for something completely unrelated to the club he's signed for, then you just know that you're out of luck. He was signed as the major marquee summer signing. He'd fitted in quite nicely. He was quite good in the Champions League games. He'd shown flashes of the skill. The Villa game, he was absolutely brilliant. So we spent all of that money on him. We obviously didn't know he was going to be missing for the vast majority of the season, and the midfield is going to be built around him. So I don't think you can underestimate how big a blow this has been to the club as well. The summer transfer window sort of related to Tonali. The club obviously weren't to know what was going to happen with Tonali, or that Harvey Barnes was going to suffer a freak foot injury as well so early in his career. But I think even if those players had been fit, there might still have been a few questions about whether we were actually prepared for a campaign to fight on 4 fronts. The 2 young fullbacks were signed with an eye on the future. Tina's obviously ready now. But the FFP constraints, which again we'll talk about a little bit later, I think with those strict constraints, maybe we could have it might have been prudent to maybe spend a bit of that money on first team ready players maybe. But, you know, we didn't want to waste money on players that weren't that much better than what we already had. So Lewis Hall signing was obviously, he came in on a FFP friendly loan deal, which just shows what a big problem the finances were. And the squad has been found wanting when Howe has not wanted to use some of the few reserve players he has had available to him, Matt Ritchie, Paul Dummett, guys like that. I think we always knew it was going to take longer than 4 transfer windows to totally revamp the squad. But I think the owners will have a bit of sympathy with Howe here. And I think maybe an understanding that they could have possibly equipped him a bit better for this campaign ahead. How easy that might have been, who knows? But maybe they could have done something to try and, you know, get a few more first team ready players available. But again, it's just so hard. Like the money that you'd have to spend on a right winger, like which we'll talk about, or a new centre back would be huge. And we just didn't have that kind of money last summer. The cup draw and the standard of the opposition we've played, we'll never ever have a season like this, right? There was a point after we played Chelsea in the League Cup, 69% of Newcastle's games up to that stage had been against either Big Six clubs who have far greater resources than us, other Premier League clubs playing in Europe, so that's Brighton, Aston Villa, West Ham, or Champions League teams. And we all know the Champions League draw that we got. The cup draws, Manchester City, Manchester United, Chelsea, they've been historically difficult, which has meant that we've had a lot of games against very strong opposition. This is not a complaint, because this is what we want. This is what fans want. This is what playing at this level is all about. These are the big games we want, but it's reduced the ability to rotate the squad, which has then in turn led to more fatigue. Like Aston Villa can rotate their squad when they play in Europe because they're playing weaker teams, or if clubs get a weaker cup draw, Carabao Cup draw, then they can rotate the squad a bit more than we have been able to. Forest came at the end of an absolutely brutal run of 10 games in 32 days, and we have midweek games every week for 5 weeks. So it's not a complaint. It's not a complaint. This is what we want. This is what we have to get used to when we're going to be competing in Europe consistently. But combined with the injuries, it really has been really punishing. I think Eddie's best attribute as a manager and a coach is the work, his coaching ability and the work that he does on the training ground. So it's no coincidence that when this is taken away from him, performances have suffered. And it's a pretty decent bet that when this is reinstated in January, we've got hard games in January, but we've got less games. I think performance levels will pick up. And it would not be a surprise to see us put in a decent performance at Liverpool, even if we don't get the result, because it's a very, very hard game still. So that's a mitigation. There's some criticisms of Eddie. There's some mitigation there. I think everybody was very clear from the club. The executive figures, Eddie Howe, was very, very clear in the Amazon documentary and other things I've listened to, such as the True Faith Live podcast. Everyone knew this was going to be a hard season. There was going to be a drop-off in performances. I think the messaging was intended as expectation management, but it's also based in the reality of what usually happens when clubs qualify for the Champions League for the first time. We overachieved to such an extent last season that we got into the Champions League probably 3 years above of what was budgeted for and what was expected. So they knew that while that was such a good achievement and really exciting for everybody, it was going to be difficult to replicate. And they also knew there's going to be new expectations from fans and from the wider football public. Newcastle are a scalp now, a big club again. And I think the mitigating factors that I've just talked about just made that challenge even harder. Football doesn't stand still, so you're only as good as your latest result in the court of public opinion. But it's worth reiterating the scale of the job that Eddie Howe has done in the 2 years to December 2023. A lot of people don't want to hear this, but you can't not look at it. You can't not look at the context. Eddie Howe took Newcastle from 19th and winless after 15 games to the Champions League, and the closest we've been in 2 decades to winning a trophy in a little over 18 months. He did this using a lot of players that played for us in the Championship under Steve Bruce and Rafa. And he turned what were previously regarded as average Championship-level footballers into Champions League players. Every single player he's coached, almost, he's improved. And he transformed the culture at the club. Even this season, we've beaten Manchester City, we've beaten Arsenal, Chelsea, we beat Manchester United home and away, we beat PSG, we beat Aston Villa. And at one stage in the autumn, we had won 8 of 12 games in all competitions, and we were top of the Premier League form table, going unbeaten in 7 games. This is months ago. This is 2 months ago I'm talking about here. This is not a long time ago. The PSG game is one of the best nights in the club's history, I think. And the week of November going into December, where we beat Chelsea and beat Man United and drew with PSG, was the best week one of the best weeks in the club's history. This is this month. It ended this month against Man United. The Man United game was on the 2nd of December. So I think his calm personality is a perfect fit for this bipolar football club where everything is so close to just crisis after a few games, as we're witnessing now. And none of what he's done is invalidated because he's gone on a sustained period of bad form for the first time in his time at Newcastle in the last 2 years. He should have enough credit in the bank. You said the other day, Keegan, he's got enough runs on the board to see him through this season and into next season. And for me, even if we lose to Sunderland, I don't want to lose to Sunderland. I don't want to think about that. It's not worth thinking about. But even if that happens, he's still got enough credit in the bank from what he did last season. You cannot definitively or accurately judge him at a time when he's had half of his first team squad unavailable. and he hasn't been able to train his players for the best part of 2 months. No manager can be judged in these circumstances, and certainly not to the point that their job should be at risk. The nuclear option to sack him, you know. Having said that, I think he needs to show that he can and he will learn from this period. If he wants to manage the club in the long term, he's going to have to adapt to less time on the training ground, because this club is going to be playing in Europe all the time in future. And he's going to have to come up with solutions to the away form and come up with alternate tactical plans and all that sort of stuff. But Eddie Howe doesn't need me or any other supporter to tell him what he needs to do. He knows this. He lives and breathes Newcastle United. He is obsessed with bringing success to the club. He doesn't see his family. He's almost exclusively dedicated to the success of Newcastle United. He doesn't need to be told by anyone that he needs to improve. He knows this, and the evidence of his career suggests he will do it. Arsenal, between October and December 2020, so Mikel Arteta's Arsenal went on a run of 10 league games where they won 1, drew 2 and lost 7. And in that run, they lost to Burnley, Wolves, and a poor Aston Villa team as well. I was talking to another friend about this who said Arteta and Klopp had never been on a run like this Eddie's on at the moment. And I went and did this research and discovered that they had. Arsenal had under Arteta a few years ago. The fans were screaming for his head. They wanted him out. Arsenal finished 8th that season, and they did win the FA Cup as well, but he kept his job. The club trusted him and trusted his process. It took Alex Ferguson 4 years to win a trophy at Man United, and it took Klopp the same to win a trophy at Liverpool. So it takes time and patience to build a club for success. Arsenal and Liverpool keeping faith with their managers, I think, is unusual in modern football. Most owners demand instant success. Fans, including plenty of Newcastle fans, also demand instant success. There's no time for patience or for processes to be seen through. People just want to win yesterday, you know? They don't care about what happened 2 years ago or even 2 months ago. They have no regard for the context or the bigger picture. And in fact, they absolutely rail against anybody who tries to point out these reasons. They accuse fans who refuse to panic or completely piss the bed when the team loses of being unambitious happy clappers, just content to take part. I'm a happy clapper. I'm just a happy clapper. And all they see is the now, where every defeat is an absolute embarrassment, unacceptable disgrace. Adversity is always someone's fault and heads have to roll, but the manager is always the first in the firing line as well. But logic completely goes out of the window to the extent that fans believe that a 19-year-old fullback or a couple of 30-somethings who are nowhere near good enough anymore, not playing games, they think that that's more of a problem than half a team missing through injury or from playing the games every 3 days. And they seem to think that a manager who has brought such success will never, ever win a football match again, or that he's somehow permanently lost the ability to do all the things that he was doing up until 4 weeks ago. So they just won't accept it. They think reasons are just lame excuses. They don't accept the excuses. Not too long ago, don't worry. One of the great unknowns of Newcastle, this Newcastle, is what PIF actually think. So Yasser Al-Rumayyan, His Excellency, he's the Newcastle chairman, obviously. He's made grand statements on the record about being the best club in the world. And there's this idea that PIF is sitting there in Riyadh watching Newcastle lose to Luton and Forest, just waiting to pull the trigger and sack Eddie Howe, or that they won't accept a season of a lower league position after coming fourth last season. But in reality, Newcastle's a tiny part of the PIF portfolio, albeit a high-profile one. So it's a fact that they've delegated day-to-day running of the club to the British-based owners and executives like Darren Eales and Dan Ashworth. And they do want Newcastle to be the best, and they will make Newcastle be the best in time. But they're sensible and prudent business people as well. So in financial terms, Eddie Howe is responsible for doubling their investment already by getting us to the Champions League. The profile's increased as well from that, if that's what they're interested in. And there's nothing to suggest that PIF are thinking of getting more active or pulling the trigger on Eddie Howe. No one knows what they think or how ruthless they might be, because they've never owned a football club before. But we do know that it fits in with their 2030 vision owning Newcastle, and it's part of diversifying the economy. So they're not going to panic, I think, because of a few months of bad form, or even a whole season where it's not as good as last season. Murdad, the British-based owners have said many times they love Eddie Howe. Murdad said they want him to be Newcastle's Alex Ferguson. So you don't say something like that and then sack him at the first sign of adversity in the midst of an injury crisis. So how things are viewed in the club might depend on what the objective was for this season. If they wanted to get top 6, which is reasonable to assume based on last season and based on everyone saying it's going to be harder, then we might underperform that. Maybe they're going to readjust and think top 8 or top 10 might be all right. And I think they'll be sensible enough to take the emotion out of it and to give him another summer transfer window and a crack at next season. I know that Eddie Howe will not be the manager of Newcastle forever. And I think he might come up short when it comes to winning trophies consistently or winning the league or getting us into the top 4 on the regular basis. We just don't know. He's yet to prove that he can make that level and be an elite manager. And can he push himself out of what appears to be his strongest skill set of improving players, improving downtrodden players or players that are not at the elite level? So this is one of the next steps for him and one of the things that he'll be working on. And he's learned a lot of lessons this season. But the reason he's a victim of his own success, because the reason there's so much pressure on him now is because of what he achieved last season. So all of the available evidence suggests he's going to find a formula to turn it around, and he's more than earned the chance of doing so. If we're sitting here in 12 months and the same issues are happening, and if he hasn't learned lessons, if the team is struggling, and if he's got more of a squad to choose from and he's had 2 more transfer windows, then I think there'll be a strong case for making a change if things haven't improved. But we are absolutely nowhere near that at this point in time. Peter Silverstone said an interesting thing at the True Faith, one of the True Faith live shows, which was that no matter what happens on the pitch this season, the club is going to be in a stronger position in 12 months' time. So from last summer. So work has been going on to do with improving the commercial performance, the sponsorship deals. The squad is steadily improving. The club have had the Champions League experience now. Everyone is aligned and working towards the same goal, which is a successful Newcastle United. And this is far more important. It matters far more than the current identity of Newcastle's left back or the fact that Miggy Almiron doesn't have a right foot. 1 month of bad performances on the pitch in extremely testing circumstances does not change the plan. It doesn't mean that everything's going to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Everything goes to shit. And the man who is mostly responsible for the improvements should not and will not lose his job because of one bad run of form. And if he does, it's an absolute travesty. Eddie is just a fantastic football manager. He's a brilliant man as well. He's proud to represent Newcastle and he is all in on this job. He carries himself with such dignity and humility. He doesn't get drawn into petty mudslinging and, criticizing opponents, and he doesn't do self-pity or excuses. He just concentrates on what he can control. So he took a chance at a pretty damaged club, really. We'd had the takeover, but we were stuck at the bottom of the league. Nobody knew what was going to happen. And he led the club to relative success, most relative success we've had in decades, in a very short space of time. So I think the fans need to repay that loyalty to him and show the owners how much we appreciate Eddie Howe and what he's done when he needs it the most. And it's in everyone's interest for him to feel supported and loved as he works to fix things. So we must not let Eddie Howe down. And if we don't, we'll reap the benefits of that very soon. Thank you for listening to my rant. I feel a lot better for getting that off my chest.
You should have finished with, "My name's Jack and that was my TED Talk," or something like that.
Yeah, half an hour. I know. Yeah. No, but I just think it's important to get some of this across. I'm not going to change people's minds who. And I do know it's a response to probably a very small minority of fans who actually do want him to be sacked. But if we lose to Sunderland, it's going to go crazy. It's going to go nuclear. So
yes.
I'm pleased I've deleted social media anyway. But yeah.
Yeah. Well, there you go. You brought some very interesting and factual things to the argument, as always, Jack. So I'm hand on heart. I think anyone, or maybe I was a little bit hard with what I said in the last podcast with Craig about bricks and jumping off piers and things like that. But it was a spur of the moment thing. But it's absolutely crazy talk. Anyone who thinks that Eddie Howe should be sacked as manager at the moment. I can't take him seriously, and there is a large part of me that thinks, because it's a social media thing, that they're doing it for likes and clicks and attention and things like that. I think deep down, if you were with them in a pub, I don't think they'd share the same opinion that when you're face to face and stuff like that.
And some of it's fair enough. It's a response in the moment to bad results or disappointing performances and things like that, and that's fine. But I do worry slightly about, Murdad and Jamie Rubin, who do go on Twitter and they listen to what fans think. Like, they've already made comments about the atmosphere in the ground. So, like, if it gets toxic, which St. James's Park can quite easily get toxic, then I worry about how they might respond to that and what they might think that means for, what the fan base actually want. And that the reasons, debate, and the logic might just fly out the window. So I'm a bit concerned about that, more than I'm concerned about Piff coming in and saying he should be sacked, because I don't think that's going to happen. I think they wouldn't even let them sack Steve Bruce when they first came in without a plan. Like, they don't do things. They don't do things rashly. Like, it's not like Todd Bowley or what Abramovich used to do with Piff. Like, they're not going to do that. They leave the decisions up to the people who they've entrusted that to. But I do just worry a bit about what might happen with Gudusi and Rubin if things don't go well, and then over the next month or so. Yeah.
Well, hopefully Amanda cracks a whip, and I think she probably wears the pants in that relationship as well, so she gets her way. But all right, we'll wrap up Eddie Howe there. We'll have a quick break, and we'll jump into part 2 with a Toon under transfer special, if you want to call it that. Right, so Jack, we've got a very interesting month ahead of us, I fear. I don't think it'll be as big as the first window when our new ownership took over, and I don't think it'll be as sort of quiet as what it was last year, but I definitely think that it's going to be really interesting, because there's a lot of different ways that this can go, and I'm really excited and I'm really interested myself to actually see which way we roll with things in the next sort of 30 days. So as we spoke about before we jumped on, Jack, I've been buried in Google and how-to spreadsheet all afternoon today. So for all you computer boffins and nerds out there, please forgive my not great graphs that I've made up on Microsoft Excel this afternoon. I was on debut. I've never done anything like this, but it paints a nice little picture for those watching on YouTube. We'll talk through it with the audio guys as well, but it just paints a bit of a picture of what we're dealing with at the moment with regards to FFP and all that before we sort of launch into our transfer talk. So without further ado, we'll bring up, so for those of you who don't know, which I'm sure most of you do now with FFP sort of being front of mind for the last 2 years when it comes to January and end of year transfer window. So basically FFP is governed by your revenue and your player sales, and you throw it all in the melting pot, and what you bring in and what you go out gets balanced up. And I think it's about 30 million, Jack, from memory, over a 3-year rolling period that you can't lose before sanctions start taking place, as we've seen with Everton earlier this year. So what I've found is at the moment I've got the top 10 teams in your Premier League with their revenue. So I'll bring that up now. As you can see, Manchester City is a clear number one at the moment with their wealth and their Middle Eastern kind of sponsorships and ties and all that. So this is for the last 2 financial year reports, or whatever you want to call it. I'm not sure the official names, but these are the ones that have been submitted, and I've sort of trawled through all the data on Kieran Maguire, a friend of the pod, Kieran Maguire's football finance. And if you want, you can click on all the official documents. There's 100 pages of them all for anyone who's got time and understands all that. But this is the brief kind of summary of it all. So Manchester City in revenue last sort of two years has been $1.1 billion. Liverpool and Manchester United have been 1 billion. Chelsea is next on the list, which is it's no surprise that the top six are the top six in revenue. Chelsea with 912 million. Tottenham's next, so Tottenham a little bit behind Chelsea with 805 million commercial revenue, and it's frightening to think about that when Mark Ashley took over, that we were actually a more profitable club than what Tottenham were. Interesting, West Ham were next on the list. So West Ham, the last sort of 2 years, is 453 million. Then was Aston Villa with a 415 million revenue. Newcastle after that, so 330 million in the last couple of years, which I dare say a lot of that sort of come in the last published financial results, and then Brighton. So Brighton has had the lowest profit, but they've really turned a profit. The last 12 months, they had a significant increase in their last financial result. So they're at 320 million. So that gives you a bit of an idea of, I guess, the top six clubs and the other clubs who are around us in the table at the moment, and what their kind of income is and their expenditure and everything like that. The next one I'll bring up is a really, really interesting one. So this is over the same amount of time. So the 2021 season and the 21-22 season. So this is player sales. So as you can see, we'll start off at the top. So Chelsea have had a lot, and they've got a lot of players, Jack. So this shouldn't be no surprise. They do spend a lot of money, but they do actually bring a lot of money in as well. So I think they've had upwards of 45 players sign on their books. So they've generated 422 million in player sales in that period. And then that doesn't actually factor in. So these are only off the last couple of years. So I think that doesn't factor in Kai Havertz and Mason Mount, who were sold in the summer as well. And then obviously, no surprise, the second one is Brighton. They had a very big kind of 2 years with their player sales, and then you can chuck in 115 on top of that for Casado, which also happened in the summer. Manchester City, so they've sort of taken a leaf out of the Chelsea book as well, with buying a lot of players and sort of feeding them off to their different arms and teams and things like that. So they're actually third on the player sales with 322 million, plus you can add another 70 odd for Cole Palmer and Mahrez, who have jettisoned off in the summer as well. So Aston Villa might surprise people that they're fourth, but they did sell Jack Grealish for 100 million, so that does account for a lot of that money as well. Next up is Tottenham. So Tottenham have actually sold a few players, but also you can add another 80 million for Harry Kane on top of that as well. So, and then West Ham have sold a few players, and you can add another 115 on top of that for Declan Rice. So this part I found a bit interesting. So Liverpool, Arsenal, and Manchester United. Now, we've had Tom from the Manchester United pubcast on a few times on our podcast, and he's mentioned nearly every single time that, and kind of lamented the fact, I guess, that Manchester United can't sell players. They buy them for overinflated prices, and surprise, surprise, they're not as good as what they thought they were, and they can't actually flog them off for much at all. They just sort of sell them at a sunk cost just to get them off their books. So, yeah, Manchester United, out of the top 10, were actually the ninth ranked team in player sales. So they come in at, well, not a great deal, really. It was only 95 million over the 2 years. So it's not great. And then it comes to Newcastle United, who are last with just the 50 million in player sales over that year, Jack. So that doesn't actually factor in the ASM sale, which was, I think, reportedly around 23 million as well. So the reason I bring this up is this is how hamstrung, I guess, we are when it comes to recruitment and things like that. We don't have a cash cow like the other three teams have had who aren't in the top six. So the top six's revenues are through the roof, and they're astronomical, and they're a reason why they're called the top six, because of their their sort of worldwide appeal and the money they can generate, not just on the field through players, but actually off it with sponsorships and all that sort of stuff. But the other three teams have sold a really big fish or multiple fish, if in the case of Brighton. So that's how far back we have to come. And it kind of does, Tony, your point a little bit. I think the Lewis Hall stuff, like people are saying about him, and if FFP is an issue, why do we purchase Lewis Hall? Well, we didn't actually buy him. It's only a loan at the moment. We had to loan him because of this whole FFP thing. So, which leads us into this next 30 days, Jack. And how is it going to look? Because if the club keep preaching this FFP stuff because it's true, and they can't do what all these other teams around us can do. And that's why we've heard the term sort of box clever and all that sort of stuff over the last kind of 18 months, because they knew that the money wasn't there and they didn't have the resources to spend as what other teams have had. And like you said, like we see West Ham now playing really well, and they still have a bit of that Declan Rice money to spend as well. Harry Kane was sold on the last or second last day of the transfer window, so they haven't really touched that money. So they'll have 80 million, and Aston Villa, I think they're kind of spent the Jack Grealish money now, but you can see that they're a really good team. So they've invested that wisely. So when it comes to January, Jack, what do we actually need? Because I think we're not in a want window, we're in a need window. And it's the thing that's really, I guess, sort of playing and bouncing in between my head is, come the end of the transfer window, we potentially could have, or we should have, Jamal Lascelles, Harvey Barnes, Jacob Murphy, Elliot Anderson, and maybe Joe Willock fit again, which changes the whole dynamic of our team and things like that. So having said that, and what do we actually need?
Yeah. If you'd have asked me this probably a week ago,
maybe not in a player sense. Yeah, maybe in a more a positional sense. Like we're not scouts and football managers and FIFA nerds and things like that. But in terms of position, what position do you think kind of we need to get right?
Yeah. Well, it's changed, hasn't it, in the last week because of the bad results against two weaker teams. So, but it's important not to knee jerk to that though, because like we've said, we are getting players coming back. So the club will have a plan and they'll have targets and lists of targets and valuations that they put on their targets on their players. So the FFP stuff, like, it just shows you those graphs you put up. It's a cartel, really. Like, you know, the little people are down there, and it's very, very hard to get up there with the money, with the resources that these clubs have got. So we are in the process of trying to bridge that, and we will do it. It's just going to take time, like, especially with all these other rules they keep trying to put in place to stop us. But I think I was, in terms of what we need, I was quite happy for Dubravka to get a chance to be back up, but he just has not been good enough. Like, it hasn't worked. He has been a good goalkeeper for us previously, but I think we need a short-term goalkeeper to come in until Nick Pope gets back. Whether the money's there for us to go and get, you know, because Pope's 31, 32, so he's getting towards the stage where he will need to be replaced in the next 2 or 3 years. Do we go and get a good quality goalkeeper now who can then be competition for Pope, or are we going to try and, you know, keep powder dry on that and target other positions instead with the money? I think a goalkeeper short term is needed. I think a defensive midfielder, we don't actually have one, and that's been a problem in some of these recent games. So we do have Bruno, who does play there, but he does a lot more than that, and he's not kind of a destroyer. Number 6, you have to call him these days. So Calvin Phillips on loan would make a lot of sense, I think, or somebody of that profile. So we do have a defensive midfielder in the squad, and there's 2 other positions I think we will need at some point. Miggy's form has dropped off a cliff, but I think we do need a right winger anyway, like a proper top level who's going to have a greater output in terms of goals and assists than what Miggy gets. So, but that's going to be very, very expensive, that player, I think. So if we can get a target from the summer that we bring forward, then a bit like we did with Gordon last year, then that could be something we look at. And I think we need a quick centre-back as well. And I think this was something we needed in last summer that we didn't get. We don't have any pace at the back at all, really, with Botman and Cher, and even Lascelles and Byrne are not quick when they play there. So, again, I think that's going to be a very expensive acquisition, and I don't know if the money is there at this stage for that as well. So, they're the 4 positions I think we do need reinforcements in, and I think a goalkeeper and probably a defensive central midfielder are the most pressing, probably positions at this stage to try and get us out this bit of a rut that we're in. But like I said, we don't want to be making expensive decisions on players now just because of this run when things are going to improve when we get players back, like you said.
Yeah. So fortunately, I guess that we can box clever in this space. So if we can somehow manage to get Calvin Phillips on loan for 6 months just to kind of get us out of the shit until the end of the season, and then Tonali will come back and hopefully fill that role and be really, really good at it with 12 months of training and acclimatizing, getting to know his teammates, the city, the area, all that sort of stuff. The next one, it seems like a no-brainer. I know money might be an issue, but David De Gea, it just seems for the same thing, whether that's just a short 6-month contract just to get us out of the shit until the summer, and then we can kind of reevaluate. Like if money is tight, they seem like no-brainers until we can kind of get our feet under us and a bit more money coming in, and potentially, like you mentioned, Miggy, maybe he could be the sacrificial lamb in the summer if we get a decent right winger and sort of upgrade him, still have Murphy as your backup, and he's proven more than capable the times he filled in last year as well. Is that too simplistic, I guess?
No, well, I don't think so. Part of the problem is we still don't have players to sell that we would actually want to sell. Like, we've got a lot of good players now, but these are players like Botman and Bruno and Isak and Gordon that we don't want to sell. Like, you know, Willock is a big miss. He's probably worth some money. Miggy is getting towards 30. We might be able to get some money for him potentially, but there's still nobody that jumps out like the way Chelsea have had over the years, where they just sell players from their academy for 10 million plus, and Man City
have done the same. You never heard of these guys before.
We're a million miles away from doing that still at the moment. So I don't know. I mean, the Champions League has helped obviously with FFP. So, and because of the way that the accounts work, they're delayed, so we don't actually know how much money we do have to spend.
Yeah,
but the club have not
haven't released last year's ones yet still,
and the club haven't been as talking about FFP as much. But I think the reality might be that we actually have to sell a big player at some point. If Bruno's got 100 million release clause, nobody wants to lose Bruno. He's the talisman. He's fantastic. He's a world-class player. But 100 million, you can basically, the way FFP works, you can basically reinvest that in five 20 million pound players, or, you know, 3 40 million pound players. And that's what clubs do. You sell valuable players, and then you reinvest it properly, and you get better, you know. And that's the reality. It's something that people don't want to talk about or think about, but that might have to happen in the next 18 months or so, if we do want to get money and spending power and start bridging that gap.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting as well, and it's kind of important, I think, to note that our revenue is increasing, like compared to what it was probably when the first account for us was published anyway. So since then, we've got Seller as obviously our front of shirt sponsor, and Noon's jumped on as a sleeve sponsor, who was actually worth more than what the Fun 88 front of shirt sponsor was at the time. Saudi has jumped on as our official commercial airline partners as well. So they're the official airline of Saudi Arabia. And then I think the big one, which doesn't kick in obviously until June or probably July the 1st, is Adidas as our kit manufacturer again, which is probably our most lucrative sponsorship in history. So we can't spend, and the Amazon doco, they explained it really well, is normally they sort of race ahead off the field and then the on-field stuff kind of catches up, where we're doing it in reverse. The on-field it's kind of raced ahead and the off-field's trying to keep up, which they haven't been able to do yet because everything's sort of been extrapolated and fast forward way quicker than anyone off the field had kind of envisioned it to be. So it has been a little bit of a shit show in that regard, where we haven't had time and we're just trying to find money and sponsors. And Bobby's mentioned this a few times on the LinkedIn, on the club's LinkedIn. They're forever announcing it's almost like a new sponsor every week. So they are doing the best they can to get this revenue in. But yeah, we still put miles and hundreds of millions of pounds off where we need to be to compete with these other teams in the top 10 as well. So having said that, I 100% agree. I think a right wing is probably the position we need upgrading like urgently in terms of buying a player. I think hopefully we can sort of not spend that money and get De Gea and Calvin Phillips as short-term gaps to get us through the rest of the season, and then Tonali will come through and hopefully, look, you've got to remember, towards the back end of last season, there was a lot of talk for Joe Willock to be in the England squad. Like that's how well he was playing, and his speed and everything like that, and his ability to play on the left wing and play through the middle as well. Like, we've really missed it, and I don't think it's been spoken about enough, especially in and around everyone sort of talks about your Tonali and whether Wilson or Isak's been injured, Botman was out for a while, and Barnes. But Joe Willock has been an absolute killer for me. Like, we've missed him so badly.
Yeah, he's a unique profile of player as well, where he's got that ball carrying ability in the midfield, and Liverpool were pretty heavily linked with him for a while as well there. So, he's been a huge miss, like you said. I think maybe looking at Ramsdale on loan, like if we can get him on you'd have to pay a loan fee for 6 months, but then if you could get like an obligation, an option to buy there if it worked out well, and then you can take the loan fee off the transfer fee in the end, something like that. That's what happened with Matt Target. But if you could do that for Ramsdale and Calvin Phillips as well, maybe, something like that might work. It depends on the club's ability to do these deals, I guess. But they've the thing is now Newcastle have got scouts all over the place. They were advertising for like a friggin' Ecuadorian scout or something not long ago. So and they've obviously got Dan Ashworth in his contact book now as well. So there will be players out there that we can look at. It's just whether they're going to be ready to come in and do what we need them to do. And if the club have readjusted their expectations for the season as well, are they accepting now that we might not get, well, top 4 is a very, very big ask. Top 6 might be a big ask. We're 4 points off that at the moment. Do they want to go all out and push for the top 6, by making signings this window, or are they just happy to say, right, let's wait till the summer again. Let's not do anything rash. Let's just wait and see what we need. That won't be popular, that move, but that's not to say it's not the right thing to do, though. And that's why you don't have football fans in charge of clubs making emotional decisions with millions and millions and millions of pounds, because you get experts in to do that. So, and I trust the people in charge still wholeheartedly to do the right thing by the club, even if that means they might get some short-term heat. But I think they will make at least 2 or 3 signings this window, and I think that's much needed.
Yeah. So having said that, we'll finish on this. Come February the 1st, when the proverbial window slams shut, doesn't gently close or anything like that, it slams shut. What will a successful January look like for you?
I think getting a goalkeeper and getting a midfielder of some sort, and then a really successful January would be, getting a high profile or a very good elite level right-sided forward who can step in and play straight away. I think the club will be looking at some younger signings as well, as they usually do. So that would be good as well. But you can never say what a successful window is. Like the summer window looked successful until two of the players were unavailable. So it's
It
just
was
so hard
until
to
it turned to shit.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So yeah, watch this space. We'll probably be dropping pods. We'll do our normal sort of review preview shows as well. But if anything kind of breaks imminently, we'll probably jump on and we'll do a quick little fun size pod for everyone, talking about whoever's coming in, perhaps, or potentially leaving. I don't think we'll be looking to sort of get rid of anyone at the moment, given still how threadbare our squad is. So stay tuned for that. Jack, I really hope you feel better getting all that off your chest now, and
I really do.
you can sort of just, it feels like a weight's been lifted off your shoulders and everything like that. So
I can
it was
enjoy the
great
rest
to
of the
hear.
holidays now.
Yeah,
I know
yeah,
that it's been festering. It's been bubbling
yeah.
away for the last week, and like it does. Like I was after the Forest game, I was sitting there scrolling on Twitter, and it was the middle of the night, and I was just like, nah, I can't do this. Like it's good to have this outlet to be able to vent a little bit.
All right, so thanks everyone for tuning in. Let us know what you think we need in the comments or on our socials and things like that. I'm absolutely fascinated, like I said, with what we're going to do. So I would love to hear everyone else's thoughts of what we need, what we might do, and what we should do, and things like that. So jump us in. Chuck, write to me on Twitter. Don't write to Jack anymore. You can take that Jack Stanley thing off, mate. That's not warranted anymore. You can just put Jack in your name. So, yeah, thanks for joining me, mate. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. We'll catch you, I think, with the Liverpool preview coming up in the next couple of days. So keep your eyes and ears out for that. Thanks very much, Jack.
Cheers, Keeg. See ya.
See you guys.